I wish I was more of a patient person, but if you really want to see the measure of my patience, just watch me following my wife through a store as she browses. For me, that feels like endless wandering, and there's no rhyme or reason to it, right, guys? I mean, you just go from place to place looking at shoes and different things, and you're just asking yourself, when will this end? And sometimes, I'll be honest, I have to work on my patience during those moments. What I know is that right now we're in a season of wandering where all of us just feel like we're wandering without aim. There's just a wandering right now that might make us lose our patience. And also what I know is that for every person, whether you're a Christian or not, patience is something you know is good and you want more of. So the bad news is that patience is a lifelong lesson that you never fully master. The good news is that we see a lot of lessons about patience as we look at the Old Testament Israelites and what they did during their lengthy season of wandering. There were many times throughout the 40 years that, as you can imagine, they grew very impatient. And we see some of those highlights and some of those stories so that we can learn from them and also apply what they learned the hard way. So I'm about to read a section from Numbers, and this section highlights what happened one day when the people just grew impatient. What had just happened that we're about to look at is a series of things happened in quick succession. What happened is that Miriam, the sister of Moses, died. Aaron, the brother of Moses, and also the spokesman of Moses, had died. Also, the Israelites were attacked by a Canaanite king, and they had to go rescue their people. And now the final thing, they got close to the promised land that was supposed to be theirs. But Edom, a nation, denied their passage. And so now they were going to have to double back exactly where they came from and go through a very long detour. And here's where we pick up in Numbers chapter 21. They traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom, but the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses, and they said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among the people. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Please pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. And just a couple of things. You can see that when they lost their patience, it was ugly. They spoke against God and they spoke against Moses. Even though they should have had faith in God, they didn't. And that was an ugly thing. But what I want to focus on real quick is the lesson we can learn from this. The reason they were impatient is kind of two things. Number one, they forgot their purpose. And number two, they forgot God's promise. They forgot that God's promise was that they would inherit this new land, and God would keep that promise. There was no reason for them to grow impatient. And the second thing is they forgot their purpose in this. Their purpose was not to be comfortable. Their purpose was not a quick and easy trip. Their purpose was just to follow God through this season of wandering so that God could do what he promised to do, is to give them that land. So they grew impatient because they forgot their purpose and because they forgot God's promise. And I think that's exactly what happens to us also today. When I forget God's purpose for me and when I forget his promise for me, that's when I grow impatient. And as we go through the season of COVID with all the wandering and all the waiting and all the uncertainties, we can grow so impatient if we forget that there is a promise behind us to guide us, and there is a purpose God has for us in it. For you, the promise and the purpose is something so simple, and yet something that we tend to forget. The promise is that God is with you. And your purpose is simply to reflect his love and gratitude in your life. God's promise is that nothing can separate you from him. And your purpose is to grow in your knowledge and understanding of Jesus and what he means for you. As you think through life, you might be thinking right now about a time this last week that you were growing impatient. And maybe it was for a good reason, because there are some things we should have no patience for. But I think during this season, there's a lot of things that we could do to improve our level of patience. So maybe today, would you just pause and think to yourself, what is God's purpose for you? What is God's promise to you? And as you work to instill those things in your heart, what I believe will happen is you will see God's gift and God's fruit of patience begin to overflow in your life.
Did you enjoy this video? Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube so you don't miss a single message. Click right here.